Welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our headlines this hour. The IDF confirms the deaths of 4 more soldiers in northern Gaza as the battle to dislodge Hamas from one of its final strongholds rages on. 2 killed in a Hezbollah rocket attack on the northern Israeli town of Nahariya. And the most pro-Israel US administration in years. We look at President-elect Donald Trump's nominations, including the Florida Senator Marco Rubio. First, the IDF has confirmed that 4 soldiers have been killed during the fighting in northern Gaza. The IDF is in the midst of its 4th offensive in northern Gaza and says the Jabalia district remains one of the last holdouts of Hamas. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran.
With fighting in the Gaza Strip stagnant, the absence of a diplomatic solution means the toll continues to rise. 5 IDF soldiers were killed in the past 24 hours in fighting in northern Gaza's Jabalia, the army said on Monday. Staff Sergeant Ofir Eliyahu, 20 years old, from Holon. Staff Sergeant Naveh Yair Asulin, 21, from Karmit. Staff Sergeant Gary Lalaruai Kima Zolat, 21, from Afula. And Staff Sergeant Or Katz, 20, from Ma'ale Adumim. Hours before, the IDF announced the death of a major in the reserves, Itamar Levin Friedman, 34, from Eilat, bringing the death toll in the ground offensive against Hamas in Gaza to 373. Meanwhile, the forces continued to operate on the ground, eliminating dozens of terrorists and dismantling Hamas sites, the IDF said.
ניתן לראות פה ממש לידי מתחם שיגורים, זה מה שהחמאס יורה לעבר עוטף עזה. נגיע לכל מקום שהאויב שם בו מתקני שיגור או כל דבר שיורה לעבר אזרחי מדינת ישראל, אנחנו נגיע אליו, נחסל אותו ונשמיד אותו.
On the humanitarian front, Israel's cabinet approved a series of steps to boost the entry and distribution of aid in Gaza ahead of the Wednesday deadline set by the Secretaries of Defense and State of the United States.
When it comes to progress on the other steps that the Secretary laid out in the letter to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we have seen Israel take a number of important steps over the past several weeks, including in just the past few days. So what we want to see over the coming days and coming weeks is to see these new routes actually have more humanitarian assistance delivered over them.
These steps included opening a new border crossing near Kibbutz Kisufim to increase the volume of aid entering the Strip. In northern Gaza, where conditions are most dire, hundreds of food and water packages were delivered to the areas of Jabalia and Beit Hanun. But the United Nations and aid groups claim that's far from enough.
We are witnessing not only a horrific humanitarian nightmare, but a rapidly accelerating and unraveling of the prospects for a sustainable resolution to this conflict. Last week, I was again in Gaza Strip, and what I witnessed defies imagination.
Even before the 30-day deadline expires, aid groups are already accusing Israel for failing to meet the U.S.'s demands. The outgoing Biden administration warned that failure to comply could trigger a partial weapons embargo from Washington.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Danny Ayalon is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and the former Israeli deputy foreign minister. Good evening to you, Ambassador.
Pleasure.
We're also joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran, who put together that report. So, Ariel, as we saw in your report, tragically, 5 more IDF soldiers killed in the fighting in Gaza. And this is the 4th time that the IDF has had to go into this neighbourhood. What is happening, and is it getting a hold on things there now?
Well, as happens in all places that the IDF operates and then exits, the goal of the IDF, also in southern Lebanon, is not to conquer, it's not to occupy, it's to remove and eliminate terror infrastructure and then move on to the next site. Now, given that Israeli forces have been operating underground for around a year now in the Gaza Strip, there have been multiple areas that they have had to return to in order to remove newly established infrastructure or just to disrupt attempts by Hamas to reestablish their military structure in the areas. Jabalia is considered one of the fiercest strongholds of Hamas. It's just in the northern outskirts of Gaza City. And this also comes not only in an attempt to eliminate renewed Hamas terror infrastructure, which unfortunately, and by your question, it is understandable that if they leave, Hamas will try and return to the area and reestablish that. And that just shows how the current reality on the ground is stagnant and waiting for a diplomatic solution to carry Israel outside of the mud that it is continuing to deepen further and further.
And Danny Ayalon, that diplomatic solution seems almost impossible at the moment, given the political situation in the United States. We are in a kind of in-between period now, aren't we?
Yes, it's a limbo, and we have a lame duck administration, although they still have teeth that can bite us with the partial embargo or maybe with the UN Security Council resolutions. But everything is, of course, reversible. And I think come the new administration, Israel will be in a much better position, because we see already the appointments of Trump, Secretary of Defense probably, and State, which have not been announced yet, but we know probably who we are. Of course, the National Security Advisor, the Ambassador to the UN, and Ms. Stefanik. So we have a real team that would really focus on deterrence and achieving our goal, that is, destroy Hamas.
But of course, they don't come in until January 20th.
Absolutely. So we have just to bite our lips and go through this 6 weeks or so. But I must tell you, as Mr. Osseron said, it is very tough. It's a mop-up operation on multi-level, subterranean and above. And the main problem is the IDF does not have enough troops. We could have, had we had another division or 2 divisions going in, it could have been much easier. But we have to split the forces, Lebanon and here, and of course, Samaria. We need a larger army. But this is a political issue. Yeah,
that is. And one we may visit later. Danny, thank you very much indeed for now. Well, the IDF remains under increasing international pressure to end the war in Gaza. The UN are coming out with 2 separate reports this week. One claims that women and children make up most of the casualties in the war with Hamas. Another, out today from UNRWA, says that Israel has missed its aid targets in the Strip. Well, recently back from visiting Gaza with the IDF, Andrew Fox is a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Andrew. Good to see you. And first of all, the UN's controversial, I think it's fair to say, aid agency UNRWA accusing Israel today of missing its aid targets. Israel denies this. What's happening exactly?
It's the same old he said, she said story at the moment. UNRWA make accusations, Israel deny. Now, Israel has given a fairly good indication that there are 900 trucks of aid inside Gaza waiting to be distributed. They've put photos of that on their websites. But the issue is UNRWA claim that because Israel is an occupying power, that they have the responsibility to facilitate that distribution. Now, Israel will maintain that they are not occupying because they've not, under the Hague Convention of 1907, taken on the functions of government and administration within Gaza. So we're in this he said, she said situation, but I think it all boils down to the fact that aid distribution in a war zone is really difficult. And somebody needs to step up and take ownership of that. UNRWA don't seem capable of it. The IDF say that they won't, and so somebody needs to.
Right. And what about this other report then on casualties? I mean, this UN study, which got a lot of international headlines, literally cites Hamas figures, and it seeks to extrapolate from the alleged data for 8,000 people. I mean, given what you know and what you've seen in Gaza, what do you make of that?
I mean, I've studied these fatality reports extensively. I've just lived them for the last 3 months of my life. And this UN report, frankly, wouldn't pass a high school maths test. It's a dreadful piece of work. Actually, Hamas's figures only say 55% women and children, if we look at that. So they're going well above what Hamas are claiming. And the reason they're doing so is that they've only looked at 8,000 casualties that they can verify by 3 independent sources. And what that means is the focus of all of the strikes they're looking at are essentially the mass casualty events, where I think 64% of them were in casualty events where there were 10 casualties or more. And what that means is they're ignoring all the strikes that they can't verify, which are going to be the ones with minimal or low collateral damage, i.e. the ones that are actually on Hamas fighters in direct combat with the IDF. So it's a deeply silly report, and it's really disappointing that international media hasn't done their basic due diligence on these statistics to point out the deep flaws in their methodology.
And Andrew, do you think there's a link between all of these UN reports coming out right now and what just happened in the United States in terms of Trump's re-election?
I think there's definitely pressure on certainly what you might call the Palestinian side, and I'd include the UN in that. We know that Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State. We know that Representative Waltz is going to be the National Security Advisor, both very pro-Israel. And I suspect that a lot of American pressure that's been very heavily restraining IDF operations for the last year is likely to be lifted once Mr. Trump is in position. So I think, in terms of the IDF's freedom of ability to act and international pressure on the IDF, I'm hoping that will reduce once Mr. Trump has taken office.
Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society, thank you very much indeed. Well, as you heard there, President-elect Donald Trump has chosen 3 strongly pro-Israel lawmakers for top jobs in his administration, among them Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who, if confirmed, would be America's first Latino Secretary of State. Our Emma Siegel has more.
President-elect Donald Trump is ramping up his support for Israel with his latest picks to join his administration in January. On Sunday, Trump announced he picked U.S. Representative Elise Stefanik as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, who regularly criticizes the institution for its attitude towards Israel. Stefanik made headlines last year with her questioning of college presidents who did not denounce anti-Semitism during a House hearing. In May, she went to southern Israel to see the communities destroyed on October 7th before addressing Israel's Knesset.
I have been clear at home, and I will be clear here. There is no excuse for an American president to block aid to Israel, aid that was duly passed by the Congress. There is no excuse to ease sanctions on Iran, paying a $6 billion ransom to the world's leading state sponsor of terror, or to dither and hide while our friends fight for their lives.
Sources now say that Trump has selected Mike Waltz as a national security advisor. Waltz is a strong adversary of Iran, and after Israel retaliated against Iran last month, Waltz said that Israel should have struck Iranian oil exports and nuclear facilities. He is also very outspoken on Israel-U.S. ties.
At the end of the day, there is strong support for Israel. We understand Israel is in the middle of a war, that this could mean the end of its existence. If the ring of fire that the Ayatollah continually talks about between Hezbollah, Hamas, the militias in Syria, the Houthis to the south, and then direct attacks from Iran. God help us all if Iran achieves a nuclear weapon. That is terrifying to everyone. So there is steady and strong support.
Trump is expected to tap strong Israel supporter Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Rubio also holds strong stances against Iran, and in October he released a statement saying he supported Israel's right to, quote, disproportionately stop threats from Iran. He spoke about the Iranian regime in an exclusive interview with I-24 News.
The central issue in this region is Iran's ambition to be a regional hegemonic power. If Iran did not exist, let me not say Iran, if the Iranian regime were not in power and did not exist, there would be no Hezbollah. There probably would be no Hamas, certainly not with these capabilities. There most certainly would be no Houthi threat. Syria would look very different. Iraq would look very different. Imagine a region without the Iranian regime.
As Trump takes office in just a few months, Iran deterrence and stabilizing the Middle East appear to be top priorities on his agenda.
Well, to talk more about that, we are joined by our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who is at the White House, where the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog, is meeting with the outgoing President Joe Biden right now. But, Mike, I want to talk about the future, because there had been a lot of fears here in Israel that there may be an isolationist Trump administration. But from what we've seen so far, it does look like some very pro-Israel candidates are in there right now.
Yeah, Laura, as I said, a few days ago, I think what's going to happen is just going to wind up being a mix, sort of a hodgepodge of the isolationist wing of Trump world. We see that somewhat in J.D. Vance and his vice presidential selection, but more so in the foreign policy realm thus far. We've seen more of the traditional Republican orthodoxy in terms of foreign policy. Marco Rubio's been around since 2010. He's shifted a bit on Ukraine, but for the most part has fallen in line with the majority of Senate Republicans in terms of posture toward the Israel-Hamas war, the broader Middle East. Rubio also specialist when it comes to Latin America. Mike Waltz, former Green Beret, knows the world well. He knows the region well, a staunch ally of Israel. Again, traditional Republican foreign policy. He's, a former protege of Dick Cheney. He's worked under Rumsfeld, been around the block a few times, and really has not diverged from the old school foreign policy of Republicans of days gone by. And of course, with Elise Stefanik, she has been a Trump acolyte, no doubt. She's changed her policies and some of her principles along the way, certainly. But again, when it comes to Israel, can expect nothing but friendly ties. And to have Israel's back at the UN, Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, before making his way to the White House today, did meet with Stefanik over on Capitol Hill and was essentially told just what I told you, that Stefanik will have Israel's back at the United Nations, as previous ambassadors have had, to the most part, on both sides of the aisle.
And Mike, can we expect any obstacles to these nominations in the Senate?
No, certainly not, especially not with a Republican majority incoming in the Senate. This won't be an issue at all. In fact, Democratic Senator John Fetterman, known for his pro-Israel rhetoric, came right out and said, listen, I don't agree with Rubio on every policy measure and prescription, but he's got my support for Secretary of State. There's really no big controversy around Marco Rubio. He doesn't have any personal baggage or anything like that. He should glide right through the Senate, and I would expect the same out of Mike Waltz as well. I don't think Democrats, after losing the majority in the Senate, are going to go looking for fights on pretty popular people here. And Waltz really doesn't have very many enemies, if at all, on the Democratic side. He just hasn't been that kind of flamethrower in the House of Representatives. So it should be smooth sailing for both Rubio and Waltz, and I would presume the same for Stefanik as well.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. Mike Wagenheim there at the White House. Well, with me in studio, Danny Ayalon, former ambassador to the United States, so you know more than most about what to expect from the incoming administration. You've worked with Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton. Colin Powell. How does Marco Rubio compare?
Oh, I think he would be much better, far better than all of them together, because all of them were good for Israel, but they were very cerebral. There wasn't there this special touch or this, let's say, the special affinity to Israel. Mark Rubio really thinks like us. He has our back. And I would say that he can articulate Israeli policy and interest probably better than most Israeli politicians. And that goes also for Mark Waltz and Stefanik. And also, hopefully, we will see also the appointment of Secretary of Defense, which could be most likely Mike Rogers, who is also another good friend of Israel. So we really have the dream team in Washington right now, both in the White House with the National Security Advisor, the chief diplomat as Marco Rubio, and they are the ones who are by far the most influential when it comes to foreign policy and defense policy. And if you, with that, add Trump's, usual policy of deterrence, I guess altogether we have a much better cast to bring about much more stable Middle East through strength.
So what do you think about that then? Because there was some concern, wasn't there, that people like Tucker Carlson or Tulsi Gabbard or isolationists, national conservatives, people who don't want America involved in foreign wars, would have Trump's ear. Do you think they're being shut out? Do you think we might see them elsewhere? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, they are really on the wings. We are looking at the administration, and the policy is being determined by the insiders, not the outsiders. And also, when we talk about Laura, about isolationism, it also is nuanced. It could be isolationism, let's say, in Europe or in Latin America or anywhere else, but not necessarily in the Middle East. And as far as the Middle East is concerned, we have a major American presence here. And I don't think that this will be removed, because they do need a stability here. So yes, they're not going to seek deployment of American troops, but those who are here in the Middle East, I think, will stay. I think the isolationism will mostly impact Europe and the Ukraine.
Okay, all right, Vinod, thank you. Well, as Senator, Marco Rubio has taken a hard line on Iran and has said on several occasions that he wants tougher international sanctions on the regime. Let's talk more about that now with Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of United Against a Nuclear Iran. Good to see you, Jason. Are you encouraged then by reports that Rubio could be replacing the outgoing Antony Blinken?
Yes, it's great to be with you, Laura. I think President-elect Trump made fantastic choices in Senator Rubio and Congressman Waltz. Here you have two figures who really understand the true nature of the Iranian regime. They understand the psychology of how the Iranian regime works. And we are desperately in need of those voices around the decision-making table in Washington, because what we have been doing has not been working. And we have eroded American deterrence throughout the region. And Senator Rubio and Congressman Waltz understand the value of reestablishing American deterrence. They understand the value of using all instruments of national power, economic, diplomatic, and yes, military, to counter the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you can do all of that without triggering a wide-scale war for the United States in the region.
How do you think all of this is being received in Tehran, Jason?
I don't think the supreme leader is sleeping easy in Tehran these days, given the eroded deterrence in Iran across the board, with Hezbollah being weakened, Hamas being decimated. That's not to mention the air defense system in the Iranian regime being degraded, and missile supply bottlenecks as well. So I do not think the Iranian leadership is sleeping easy, and it's in for a rude awakening with President-elect Trump and his excellent nominees.
Do you think there might be a personal element to this, because Iran is directly implicated in a plot to try and assassinate President-elect Trump?
I think it's inevitable. When the Islamic Republic has been implicated in plots to assassinate a former president and the president-elect of the United States, then yes, it is, of course, a personal element comes into play here. But it goes beyond personal. This is not just an attack on President Trump. This is an attack on the United States of America. It is akin to an act of war, these assassination plots. And the fact that the Islamic Republic feels comfortable enough trying to assassinate a former president, soon-to-be president, on U.S. soil should really send chills down the spines of many Americans. And that the fact that there's been no response from the American government to those kinds of plots. We cannot wait to act until there's a successful, God forbid, successful attack on an American. We should be preempting that and deterring that ahead of time. And my hope is that President-elect Trump and his team will see the value in reestablishing American deterrence, which will advance U.S. interests and values.
Jason, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you.
Well, those nominations have been warmly welcomed in Israel, and the hardline Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who's also the Minister for Jewish Communities in the West Bank, has ordered his staff to prepare for the annexation of those territories. Take a listen.
I intend, with God's help, to lead a government decision that says that the government of Israel will work with the new administration of President Trump and the international community to apply the Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, and for American and international recognition, and to the end of the Israeli-Arab conflict in the Middle East.
And the Palestinian Authority has strongly condemned those comments, a spokesman saying that they constituted the ongoing forced displacement of the Palestinians. Danny Ayalon with me in the studio. I mean, Bezalel Smotrich does periodically make outlandish statements like this, but a lot of people are concerned about it. I just want to turn to the Abraham Accords, though, because the Emiratis said, didn't they would only sign the Abraham Accords if Israel promised not to annex these territories. Do you foresee a problem there?
Yeah, well, I think Mr. Smotrich is, his statements are very irresponsible. If he wants it to be done, don't talk too much, and, you have to be more, let's say, a doer. But he's really a neophyte when it comes to foreign affairs and the U.S.-Israel relations. He should remember that the Abraham Accords included, the deal of the century by no other than President Trump, who actually prescribed a Palestinian state on 70% of Judea and Samaria. That didn't fly because there were no takers, not the settlers, and certainly not the Palestinians. The Saudis weighed in. So I don't think that what he says about annexation, certainly not the entire area, is possible or is even plausible. And I think here the benchmark has already been set in 2019, Laura, by President Trump, when he talked about 70% of Judea and Samaria for a Palestinian state. Now, one thing is for sure, nobody's thinking about a Palestinian state around the corner. If anything, we're talking about years and years, because they have to, first of all, we have to demilitarize and also de-radicalize. And we know that in the Palestinian Authority, the incitement is no less than Hamas in Gaza. So what the American administration would want to see is a path leading to a political
what the Saudis
solution.
have also said.
Yes, and that could take even a generation. And this is what I think Netanyahu would understand much better than Smotrich.
Okay. Danny Ayalon, for now, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, attacks in the north. 2 men were killed today in a Hezbollah rocket barrage which hit the city of Nahariya up close to the border with Lebanon. We'll have the details on that next. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back. 2 men have been killed in a Hezbollah rocket barrage on the northern Israeli town of Nahariya. Earlier in the day, a Hezbollah drone exploded close to a kindergarten in a kibbutz. Hezbollah attacks have increased considerably in recent days as the IDF continues to fight the Iranian-backed group in both Lebanon and Syria. Our Fabio Shapiro has the latest.
Another deadly day for the north of Israel. 2 people were killed after a rocket struck a warehouse in Nahariya on Tuesday. Earlier, the citizens of Haifa district woke up to sirens of a drone infiltration from Lebanon. But Nesher, one of the few towns not warned, was where the projectile struck, hitting a kindergarten.
I'm on Hatchatsov Street. There was a projectile fall near the kindergarten. There was no warning. We are in touch with the Home Front Command to understand why there was no warning. Thank God we have no injuries. We have contacted the parents of the children who are in the kindergarten. They are all fine. I was with them. We moved them to another kindergarten. We are taking care of them and of the whole area.
The attack is seen as part of Hezbollah's escalation of attacks in the region. The uncertainty of normalcy in the region is pushing citizens to the edge. In Kiryat Ata near Haifa, residents clash with the police over returning to homes heavily damaged by the rockets. On Monday, over 190 drones were fired against the Haifa and the northern districts, causing massive damage, injuring 7 and setting the area ablaze.
When we heard the sirens, we got up and got in the shelter. We suddenly hear boom sounds behind the house. I got out of bed and 3 windows exploded in my room. Got on my bed. I got away at the last minute. Our neighbors also sustained damages. My cousin's wife also sustained an injury in her face, along with her daughters. There is a lot of damage in the houses, outside and inside, a lot of shrapnel.
The IDF responded with a series of strikes to Hezbollah's infrastructure across Beirut, a move seen by the international community as a push against a potential ceasefire. Israel believes it is not yet at that point.
I think the war with Hezbollah is not over yet. Our objectives to our war with Hezbollah are not the same to our objectives with regard to Hamas.
But a ceasefire is not entirely out of the question. While the Arab League discusses potential proposals in Riyadh, Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer met this week with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago to discuss Trump's instances in the regional conflicts, including the day after for Gaza, Saudi normalization, and a ceasefire with Hezbollah.
I think there is certain progress working on the issue. We are working with the Americans on the issue. There is progress, and we will be ready to be there if we will know, first of all, that Hezbollah is not on our border, is northern to the Litani River, and that Hezbollah will not be able to arm again.
While the war between Israel and Hezbollah continues, Lebanon also faces a political challenge. Almost 2 years without an official government and with military capabilities inferior to Hezbollah, it is unclear how the country would be able to safeguard a ceasefire and the UN Resolution 1701.
Let's get an update then. Our Joe Brown is up in northern Israel for us now. What's happening, Joe?
Well, the main story today from the Israeli standpoint was what happened in Nahariya. Early this afternoon, there were sirens throughout the area, northern Israel, and 10 rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel. Some of those were intercepted, some landed in open areas, and one landed in a warehouse. Unfortunately, 2 people, 2 men in their 40s, were pronounced dead at the scene. Separately, there was another instance around this in which 2 people suffered shrapnel wounds to their legs. They were in a light condition and will make a full recovery. But what was interesting about this is that Magen David Adom said that when they saw these people, they had the injuries to their leg, but only a couple 100 meters away from them, there was their car, and their car was decimated by the shrapnel. They left the car due to the sirens, and they followed the IDF's home front commands, which state that if you are in a car, leave there and pull up as soon as you can, and just lie down, ideally in a shelter. And they followed that, and as a result, they were able to tell the tale. But unfortunately, 2 people were killed in Nahariya, and there have been constant sirens throughout the day, dozens of projectiles and drones being fired from Lebanon into northern Israel with no signs of stopping anytime soon.
Wow, terrifying. And a stark reminder that if you're in your car during an alert, get out and get far away from it. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Joe Brown there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Danny Ayalon, former ambassador to the United States, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. And Danny, I want to speak to you, first of all, about ongoing efforts to try and get some sort of ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. We know that that is something the Biden administration has been pushing hard for right from the start. Ron Dermer, one of Netanyahu's close aides, has been meeting reportedly with Tony Blinken tonight, the US Secretary of State. Any hopes of something happening in the next few weeks?
Sadly not, because again, it's a lame duck administration. I don't think that they can really offer meaningful carrots or sticks to anyone in the area. List of partners are the Lebanese or Hamas, for that matter, in Gaza. But I think that it's important that Dermer is meeting with the Blinken. Still, they have the power until the 20th of January, and I believe that there are 2 objectives for this meeting from Israel's perspective. One is to make sure that there are no surprises, like a Security Council resolution that would dictate a ceasefire in Lebanon, which will not be on Israeli terms. And the second thing is to actually, let's say, deflect any possibility of partial embargoes.
Okay, weapons embargoes holding up Egypt.
Yes, and also the D9s, you know, the bulldozers.
That was a worrying message earlier this week, wasn't it?
Yes, right.
Ariel, where are we in terms of degrading Hezbollah's capabilities? Because they do appear to have been stepping up the attacks in recent days.
Stepping up the attacks in terms of perhaps the lethality and the use of drones to circumvent Israeli air defenses. But if we're looking at the broader scope, after we heard a former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, say that Israel reduced Hezbollah's mid and short range rocket arsenal to about 20%. This evening, the IDF announcing that it has managed to dismantle a majority of Hezbollah's weapons storage and missile manufacturing facilities located, where else? Under civilian population in Beirut, in the Lebanese capital. For decades, Hezbollah has been using these civilian residential areas to house and to shield their underground and sometimes also above ground precision missile manufacturing sites. They simply realize that it's more effective for them rather than bring them from Syria, from Iran, from Iraq, to simply manufacture them under underpopulated areas
similar to
of
Hamas
Beirut.
In terms of tactics.
Similar to Hamas, but the scope here is incomparable. Before the war, you could compare Hezbollah about 10 times stronger, also in terms of a larger arsenal. That is the scope of what we're talking about. One of these sites in Shuifat, in the Beirut southern suburb in the Dakhia, was presented by Israel and the UN General Assembly in 2020 to house underground precision missile guidance site. This and all the secondary explosions that we're seeing on the screen right now in these explosions in Beirut in recent months are a clear indication that Hezbollah is not only storing weapons embedded in civilian population, but is also manufacturing them, endangering the civilian population of Lebanon as a whole, and in Beirut specifically.
So the IDF very much has its work cut out trying to destroy these weapons capabilities, which it is doing doggedly day by day.
It's still ongoing.
And the IDF has just unveiled a new weapon in its arsenal, so to speak.
A new weapon, its 6th submarine, giving it the name Dragon. Usually the names have to do with Dakar, so they chose the word dragon to basically this is Israeli flexing, public flexing to inaugurate in the midst of a war another of its strategic weapons, which is no other message carrying besides a message of deterrence to Iran, showing that Israel has the capabilities to strike wherever it wants, whenever it wants, and it's the Israeli submarines that are keeping nuclear strikes on Israel at bay, because these submarines provide what is called the second strike capability. That is what is the deterrence in nuclear warfare, mutual assured destruction. This is what helps to deter Israel, to deter Israel's enemies, to avoid striking it in the most severe ways, which is nuclear strikes.
Also, according to, let's say, foreign resources, there's always at least one Israeli submarines in the Red Sea, very close to the shores of Iran. These submarines, we don't need to have even conventional capabilities are enough to hurt Iran very hard without all these very, very, I would say, complex operations through the squadrons of planes. So Israel, in that respect, has a lot of choices and a lot of flexibility and a lot of capabilities. So Iran should beware.
And you see this as a sign, do you, that Israel is gearing up to attack Iran, or?
Well, I think it's more deterrence, and we have not seen Iran making good on their threat to strike back at Israel. And if they do, I guess many Israelis would say, like in the wild West, just make our day. If they do that.
All right, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, Ariel Lassaran, thank you very much to you both. Well, not wanting to be left out of the action, Yemen's Houthis have claimed responsibility for 2 attacks today targeting US interests in the region. They say that they conducted 2 military operations against US naval vessels in both the Red and Arabian Seas. Now, according to the Houthis, those attacks lasted for 8 hours. We can take a listen to the spokesman for the Houthis speaking earlier.
In response to the American-British aggression against our country, and in continuation of the victory for the Palestinian and Lebanese people, the Yemeni armed forces carried out 2 qualitative military operations. The first targeted the American aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, located in the Arabian Sea. This was done with a number of cruise missiles and drones, while the American enemy was preparing to carry out hostile operations targeting our country. The second operation targeted 2 American destroyers in the Red Sea with a number of ballistic missiles and drones.
Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Colonel Rich Alderson, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Geopolitical Consultant at Dragoman LLC. Good to see you, Rich. Thank you very much for being with us. So it appears that the Houthis have carried out 2 very audacious attacks on US interests in the region. What information do you have?
Well, not the first time that they've tried to attack U.S. naval vessels. The information I have is partial at this point, but it doesn't appear that they've inflicted any damage or casualties on the U.S. ships. Of course, when the Houthis claim a major operation, it's performative in many cases, where they are claiming a victory by having launched rockets or missiles, whether they actually strike their target or not. The U.S. naval forces in the Red Sea and in that region have pretty sophisticated air and missile defenses, so it'll be a long wait before the Houthis are able to claim an actual strike. But we have to keep in mind that's not really their purpose. Again, it's performative, and by proving that they can do this, they can extort money from private shipping and do some muscle flexing of their own for domestic audiences. And
do you expect the United States to respond to attack Houthi positions in Yemen, as they have been doing in recent weeks?
I do. I think this is pretty much par for the course of what we've seen over the recent months. One of the criticisms I've had is that the pain level inflicted by U.S. retaliation for these, frankly, harassing attacks has not been sufficient to really deter the Houthis. I think there needs to be a more forceful response. But I think we can expect, yes, the United States will continue to hit first to defend against the attacks by shooting down the missiles and rockets when they're launched or drones, and then secondly, going after some of the launch locations when they can identify them in real time. I'd like to see them go a step further and actually go after some Houthi military infrastructure on the ground.
Do you think that's likely, given we've got a lame duck administration in the White House right now?
It'll be much likelier as of January 21st.
Okay, all right. Well, the United States has also been targeting Iranian-linked assets in Syria. Last night, Central Command said that it hit 9 targets, and these were linked to previous attacks on US forces in Syria. How effective were these strikes, Rich, and what is the threat level facing the US troops in Syria?
Well, I don't want to fall into the trap of assuming because that they have not had great effect to date that they cannot have a serious and lethal effect. What we're dealing with is sort of ragtag militias funded and largely directed by the Iranians, and they have not possessed a sophisticated attack, sort of complex attacks. It's really, again, sort of a shot here, a shot there. But as we saw along the Jordan-Syria border earlier this year, that can still end up in dead Americans if we're not careful about it. So Iran continues through its proxy forces in Syria and in Iraq to conduct these sort of operations. And just as we were talking about in the case of the Red Sea and the Houthis, it's been a very limited, almost tit-for-tat response. And I think something stronger needs to be done to deter these groups from such actions, or one day they're going to get lucky with one of these strikes.
Well, what about the future of US troops in Syria, Rich? Because we've been talking about how the incoming Trump administration does look to be very pro-Israel. It looks to be an administration that wants to restore American deterrence in the region. But there are also voices in Trump's administration that want US troops out of Syria specifically. And Trump, of course, pulled troops out of Syria in the past. Some say that he betrayed America's Kurdish allies. Is that still a possibility? Might he pull those troops out?
Well, Trump brings a businessman's sensibility to looking at the investment of troops, infrastructure, and operations in the various regions of the world. And he brought that sort of business-oriented logic to why the Europeans aren't paying more to help Ukraine, why we're shouldering much of the burden. And he'll do that with the Middle East as well. I think he'll look at the troops that we have in Iraq and Syria and say, what are they there to do? Are they doing it at effective cost? Can it be done more effectively in a different way? He's clearly said in the past that he's not fond of having 900 American troops in the middle of, in northeast Syria, and there might be better ways to do that. So it's possible, but the other people coming into his administration, and personnel is policy, will have some views on that too. People like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, who have been supportive of our counter-ISIS efforts there, their views will matter too. So probably too early to tell, but it's on the table.
Colonel Rich Outson, great to talk to you as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
An Iranian journalist says that she was sexually assaulted at Tehran's notorious Evin prison. Vida Rabbani was arrested back in September 2022 for reporting on the protests that followed the killing of the young woman Mahsa Amini. The International Federation of Journalists has condemned the treatment of journalists in the country. To talk more about that and other human rights abuses in Iran, we're joined by Mariam Memasadehi. She's the founder and director of the Cyrus Forum and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thank you very much for being with us, Mariam. And sadly, this isn't the first time, by any measure, is it, that we've heard about women journalists or otherwise being sexually assaulted or worse while in police custody in Iran?
Exactly, Laura. This is since the inception of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Iranian women, when they are arrested, are subjected to sexual harassment and systematic rape. In 1989, when thousands of Iranian political prisoners were executed in a prison massacre, the women were also systematically raped because, according to a fundamentalist reading of Islam, virgins cannot be killed. And so in order to kill them, in order to hang them in the prison, and this happened very quickly, and the former president, Ibrahim Raisi, was personally culpable for executing thousands of them. The girls and women were first raped before they were executed. So yes, this practice continues. It's very brave of women like this young journalist to speak out about it, because it is a systematic human rights violation by the state. and it's part of the larger Islamist ideology that basically promotes the denigration, the sexual humiliation of women and girls, and uses rape as a weapon of the state to repress and to silence dissent.
And we are seeing signs, aren't we, that the Iranians continue to export their repressive way of life to other countries. In Libya, they've just announced that they will be enforcing the hijab, the veil for women. And even more disturbingly, in Iraq, which is controlled by Iranian elements, the age of consent has been lowered to 9 years old.
Yes, I mean, these are exactly, as you mentioned, extensions of Iran's Islamist state, which is increasingly more and more an imperial entity that has taken over the Middle East writ large, with its ideology, with its practices, particularly in terms of subjugating girls and women to state control, lowering the age of marriage, age of consent for Iraqi women from 18 to 9 is particularly egregious. It basically makes the state responsible for the rape and sexual abuse of girls. It condemns them to a life of subjugation rather than helping girls and women to lift themselves and to lift their families out of poverty. The Iraqi state is instead choosing to be a regressive force like the Islamic Republic in Iran. As you mentioned, the proxy forces in Iraq, the militias inside that country are working for the Islamic Republic of Iran, and this kind of change of law from the type of secular equality and rights that Iraqi women had. Granted, of course, under Saddam, life was horrific, but imagine how in the year 2024, after so much U.S. blood and treasure, the people of Iraq are going so far backwards because of Iran's regime. And in Libya, as you mentioned, the morality police coming out, and there was so much hope, so much opportunity when Gaddafi, his regime fell. The opposition, the democratic opposition in Libya presented such a compelling, hopeful picture for that country, and yet we see that they have gone so far back. Yeah,
it's very worrying. And Mariam, I mean, things are not generally going well for the regime in Tehran in terms of geopolitics. We've got an incoming President Trump. He's nominating some real Iran hawks. The Iranians are losing their proxies through war with Israel. Are you concerned, though, that the regime may take out its frustrations on its own people, on the most vulnerable, on women, on dissidents, on people like that who don't have a voice and who can't fight back?
It does always happen that when the regime is under pressure externally, it has a tendency to take revenge on the people. However, there's also a theory that the more pressure against the regime, the less willing it is going to be to take a violent action against the people. During the Trump era, maximum pressure, extremely popular with the Iranian people, of course, because their oppressors, the people who are so corrupt and so repressive, who have a stranglehold on the society, they were under severe pressure by the Trump administration. They came out in protests. During those Trump years, over 1,500 peaceful protesters were gunned down on the streets. That is a higher number. That is almost 3 times the number of protesters killed during the Biden administration. However, I think it's more important to look at how the regime is degraded and destroyed under a maximum pressure campaign. Anyone who's honest with themselves in Iran's opposition, among the human rights community, Iranians writ large, anyone who's honest with themselves states that the Trump foreign policy, particularly now with a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and a National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, by the way, both from the state of Florida, Congressman Waltz and Senator Rubio, politicians who succeed in this state do so because they understand very well the power of ideological regimes, totalitarian regimes, anti-American regimes in Latin America, and they understand how Iran's regime, Putin's regime, the Chinese regime are one and the same and all together. With this kind of administration, the people of Iran will have much more power and possibility to bring down the regime.
So do you think that the incoming Trump administration would support Iranian dissidents were they to rise up again? In what way would you see that happening? Because Trump is talking a lot about sanctions. Marco Rubio's talked about sanctions. The argument against sanctions previously was that they were just hurting the Iranian people. I mean, what avenues do you see in terms of supporting Iranian people to overthrow the regime?
Yes, a few things, Laura. One is that this kind of regime has no qualms, of course, to harm the people and will take whatever a little bit of money that is coming into the country for itself. It very much wants to see sanctions lifted off of it. It's doing whatever it can to prevent the return of maximum pressure. But maximum pressure by itself will not get rid of the regime, and maximum pressure by itself will not help necessarily the people of Iran to overthrow the regime.
Mariam Mehmet-Sadeki, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you. And thanks for watching. Stay with us on I24 News. Good night.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
A day of deadly Hezbollah fire in the north, with 2 people killed after a rocket fired from Lebanon slams into a warehouse in Nahariya. We'll have the latest. A bloody day also in Gaza as the IDF reports 5 soldiers killed in combat there, while Israel races to meet a U.S.-set deadline on boosting humanitarian aid for the Palestinians. We'll have that story. U.S. President-elect Trump picks 3 pro-Israel lawmakers, including Senator Marco Rubio, to fill key foreign policy posts. We'll take a closer look. This is the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. A day of deadly attacks in northern Israel. 2 people were killed this afternoon when a Hezbollah rocket slammed into a warehouse in the coastal city of Nahariya, with other northern residents suffering light to moderate injuries from shrapnel there and other sites. Also this afternoon, a volley of rockets from Lebanon intercepted in the skies above Tel Aviv. And a near miracle today avoided a major tragedy near Haifa. A drone launched from Lebanon struck next to a kindergarten in the town of Nesher, just moments after teachers had evacuated the students into a shelter, despite no air raid siren alerts in the area. This is the IDF-struck buildings used by Hezbollah to make and store munitions in the Beirut suburb of Dahaya after the military's Arabic spokesman issued a warning on social media telling residents to evacuate the area. This was one of Israel's heaviest airstrikes on the Beirut capital, even amid reports of a major diplomatic push to reach an agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. More in this report from Fabio Shapiro.
Another deadly day for the north of Israel. 2 people were killed after a rocket struck a warehouse in Nahariya on Tuesday. Earlier, the citizens of Haifa district woke up to sirens of a drone infiltration from Lebanon. But Nesher, one of the few towns not warned, was where the projectile struck, hitting a kindergarten.
I'm on Hatchatsov Street. There was a projectile fall near the kindergarten. There was no warning. We are in touch with the Home Front Command to understand why there was no warning. Thank God we have no injuries. We have contacted the parents of the children who are in the kindergarten. They are all fine. I was with them. We moved them to another kindergarten. We are taking care of them and of the whole area.
The attack is seen as part of Hezbollah's escalation of attacks in the region. The uncertainty of normalcy in the region is pushing citizens to the edge. In Kiryat Ata near Haifa, residents clash with the police over returning to homes heavily damaged by the rockets. On Monday, over 190 drones were fired against the Haifa and the northern districts, causing massive damage, injuring 7 and setting the area ablaze.
When we heard the sirens, we got up and got in the shelter. We suddenly hear boom sounds behind the house. I got out of bed and 3 windows exploded in my room. Got on my bed. I got away at the last minute. Our neighbors also sustained damages. My cousin's wife also sustained an injury in her face, along with her daughters. There is a lot of damage in the houses, outside and inside, a lot of shrapnel.
The IDF responded with a series of strikes to Hezbollah's infrastructure across Beirut, a move seen by the international community as a push against a potential ceasefire. Israel believes it is not yet at that point.
I think the war with Hezbollah is not over yet. Our objectives to our war with Hezbollah are not the same to our objectives with regard to Hamas.
But a ceasefire is not entirely out of the question. While the Arab League discusses potential proposals in Riyadh, Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer met this week with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago to discuss Trump's instances in the regional conflicts, including the day after for Gaza, Saudi normalization, and a ceasefire with Hezbollah.
I think there is certain progress working on the issue. We are working with the Americans on the issue. There is progress, and we will be ready to be there if we will know, first of all, that Hezbollah is not on our border, is northern to the Litani River, and that Hezbollah will not be able to arm again.
While the war between Israel and Hezbollah continues, Lebanon also faces a political challenge. Almost 2 years without an official government, and with military capabilities inferior to Hezbollah, it is unclear how the country would be able to safeguard a ceasefire and the UN Resolution 1701.
And with us in studio, we have Professor Alon Tal. He is the chair of the Tel Aviv University Department of Public Policy and a former member of the Israeli parliament with the party of Benny Gantz, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. But first, let's jump up to Nahariya and our correspondent, Joe Brown, who is up north by Lebanon's border. And Nahariya has been, of course, increasingly a target of these rockets and drones. And today, of course, a particularly tragic day in that coastal city, Joe.
Yeah, so it's around about 4:30 p.m. local time. Rocket alert sirens sounded along the northwest coast of Israel. There were 10 rockets that were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel. Some of them were intercepted by the Israeli air systems, the Israeli air defense systems. Some of them landed in open fields, and one of them landed in a warehouse, making an impact, which is behind me right now. I'm going to hobble out of frame so you can see the impact. So one thing that's notable about Nahariya is it is very much on the northern part of Israel. It's one of the biggest cities in the northwest part, like the largest that hasn't been evacuated. And when you hear rocket alert sirens, you have roughly 3 seconds to get to shelter. Most people aren't more than 3 seconds away from a shelter, so they have to often just lie down and hope for the best. And in this case, they didn't have the best. 2 men in their 40s were pronounced dead at the scene following this. Magen David Adom arrived and said that there were fires and smoke billowing from the area. And in a separate incident, this was during the same rocket barrage, 2 people were lightly wounded, 2 people in their 30s. They were driving down the road at that moment in time, and when they heard the sirens, they quickly got out of the car. Following the IDF's home front commands, if you are in the car during a siren, you have to leave it and get to shelter if possible. And if you can't get to shelter, then just lie in the road and similarly hope for the best. But this time it worked for them because whilst they got some light wounds from the shrapnel, their car was completely decimated by the falling debris. So this is this has been one of the heaviest days of barrages, both in northern Israel and also in Lebanon, in Beirut. There have been multiple strikes in Beirut, in the Dahia suburbs in southern Beirut, which has been widely known as a Hezbollah stronghold.
Right. We'll have more on that in a bit, Joe. But I want to talk about what happened in Haifa, because there you talk about 3-second siren in Nahariya, in the town of Nesher. The sirens didn't even go off, and that UAV struck by that kindergarten. Luckily, the teachers there apparently just heard the distant sirens, and decided on their own to get the students in shelter. Certainly, people are going to have to wonder why the sirens didn't go off there in Nesher.
Yeah, the IDF says that the incident is under investigation, but wherever you are in Israel, you always look out not only for sirens in your area, but also in the surrounding areas. So at this point in the late morning, there were sirens in the Haifa Bay area, which is around about 5 miles away from Nesher, where the incident happened. And when there are sirens in surrounding areas, usually the people there try to be on their toes, because often it's them going to be next. And when you are dealing with dozens of kindergarten-aged children, 3 and under, then you'll have to get yourself organised quite quickly. So that was what they did. They decided to go to the shelter, and that saved them. They didn't hear any sirens, but they decided to plan ahead, and as a result, we are not talking about an even greater tragedy.
Yes, an ounce, what's the old saying? An ounce of caution's worth a pound of prevention, and that was certainly the case there. Thank God those teachers acted that way up in the town of Nesher. Joe Brown there in Nahariya, tragically there. Unfortunately, the outcome was different. Joe, thank you for that. Ariel, I want to go to you now more on that targets that the IDF hit in Beirut, apparently a very significant airstrike.
Well, this comes as part of a wider attempt by Israel to further degrade Hezbollah's launch and missile manufacturing capabilities. And really, in the past hour, the IDF revealing that it managed to dismantle a majority of Hezbollah's weapons storage and missile manufacturing facilities located under Beirut's southern Dakhia suburb. Now, over the past 2 decades, Hezbollah has been transitioning to self-manufacturing and of its precision missiles, of its precision rockets. What we're seeing now is an infographic of a missile manufacturing site located beneath 5 residential buildings in the Shweifat neighborhood, which is in southern Beirut. It's in Dakhia, and just one example of dozens, if not hundreds, of how Hezbollah is using civilian population as human shields to cover for their weapons arsenals and manufacturing capabilities. Now, one example, we know obviously, in addition to this, there was the 2020 Beirut port blast, and in which 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate used by Hezbollah for the manufacturing of weapons exploded, killing at least 190 civilians in the Lebanese capital. Why am I mentioning this? Because it is believed that that ammonium nitrate was part of Hezbollah's self-arming mechanism of manufacturing precision missiles and rockets in Beirut beneath civilian population. And what we have been seeing by the IDF in recent months is they're targeting these sites, and these secondary explosions that we see on the screen right now from those strikes in recent months are clear proof that what Israel is striking in these bombings are weapons manufacturing sites. There is no other reason for these secondary explosions besides the existence of powerful weapons in the site of impact. And so Israel is now announcing that it has dismantled a majority of Hezbollah's manufacturing capabilities in Beirut. This comes at the heels of a similar statement by now former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, saying that Israel reduced Hezbollah's mid-range and short-range rocket arsenal to about 20%, showing how Israel is continuing not only on the ground but also from the air to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities.
Alone, certainly a significant achievement by the IDF, and which leads us to the question. We heard the new Foreign Minister Gideon Saar. How likely do you think there might now be a diplomatic solution, at least in the short term? Should the government push towards a diplomatic solution now, or still try to rack off more achievements like we just saw?
Well, I think the fundamental question is, what are the objectives of our ground operation or military activities in Lebanon? Clearly, we have a serious security threat, but it's not clear if we want to wipe out the last Hezbollah fighter, if we want to create a renewed sense of deterrence, do we want to remove the villages that were literally on the border in which there was a very, very dangerous and deadly attempt to create a immediate threat with tunnels that would come right to Israel. And I think that's part of the question when we're deciding, is this the right time to seek a ceasefire? Have we reached enough? In other words, when we had the second Lebanon war, it was, one could argue, successful in creating deterrence for over a decade. Of course, during that time, Hezbollah became extremely powerful, and many Israelis after October 7th were unwilling to tolerate that kind of a danger. But I think that because this has been a very amorphous thing, and it includes actually in Gaza, we have a much better idea. We want to bring back the hostages, but in the objectives, until they become clear in Lebanon, it's really uncertain what the diplomatic objective is.
Right. I mean, there's talk of enforcing 1701, pulling Hezbollah forces beyond the Litani River, but the government is saying it wants other reassurances, and these, I guess, will have to be articulated more clearly.
Does that involve really neutralizing their missile capabilities? I think one of the lessons of the Ukraine war is that there has been a great democratization in long-range, certainly your drones capabilities, and it's not clear that even if we take out them, that within a few weeks some talented engineers could create new workshops that could attack Israel. So it's a very complicated call, but it really comes down to what do we want to seek in Lebanon. I don't think the objectives in Lebanon are the same as they are in Gaza.
Right, and the governments, I'm sure the U.S. Is now putting pressure on Israel to try to get a clear set of demands that they'll go. There is the Lebanese
government, as weak and pitiful as it is. We still have some opportunity to reach an arrangement with them.
Well, let's turn now from the north to the south. The IDF announced the death of 5 soldiers fighting in northern Gaza over the past 24 hours. That brings the total of soldiers killed in the ground offensive there in Gaza against Hamas to 375. Meanwhile, international aid organizations accuse Israel for failing to meet U.S. demands to allow greater humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip. This a day before the 30-day deadline that was given by the outgoing Biden administration expires. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has more on that.
With fighting in the Gaza Strip stagnant, the absence of a diplomatic solution means the toll continues to rise. 5 IDF soldiers were killed in the past 24 hours in fighting in northern Gaza's Jabalia, the army said on Monday. Staff Sergeant Ofir Eliyahu, 20 years old, from Holon. Staff Sergeant Naveh Yair Rasulin, 21, from Karmit. Staff Sergeant Gary Lalaruai Kima Zolat, 21, from Afula, and Staff Sergeant Or Katz, 20, from Ma'ale Adumim. Hours before, the IDF announced the death of a major in the reserves, Itamar Levin Friedman, 34, from Eilat, bringing the death toll in the ground offensive against Hamas in Gaza to 373. Meanwhile, the forces continue to operate on the ground, eliminating dozens of terrorists and dismantling Hamas sites, the IDF said.
ניתן לראות פה ממש לידי מתחם שיגורים, זה מה שהחמאס יורה לעבר עוטף עזה. נגיע לכל מקום שהאויב שם בו מתקני שיגור או כל דבר שיורה לעבר אזרחי מדינת ישראל, אנחנו נגיע אליו, נחסל אותו ונשמיד אותו.
On the humanitarian front, Israel's cabinet approved a series of steps to boost the entry and distribution of aid in Gaza ahead of the Wednesday deadline set by the Secretaries of Defense and State of the United States.
When it comes to progress on the other steps that the Secretary laid out in the letter to improve the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we have seen Israel take a number of important steps over the past several weeks, including in just the past few days. So what we want to see over the coming days and coming weeks is to see these new routes actually have more humanitarian assistance delivered over them.
These steps included opening a new border crossing near Kibbutz Kisufim to increase the volume of aid entering the Strip. In northern Gaza, where conditions are most dire, hundreds of food and water packages were delivered to the areas of Jabalia and Beit Hanun. But the United Nations and aid groups claim that's far from enough.
We are witnessing not only a horrific humanitarian nightmare, but a rapidly accelerating and unraveling of the prospects for a sustainable resolution to this conflict. Last week, I was again in Gaza Strip, and what I witnessed defies imagination.
Even before the 30-day deadline expires, aid groups are already accusing Israel for failing to meet the U.S.'s demands. The outgoing Biden administration warned that failure to comply could trigger a partial weapons embargo from Washington.
Alone, as you said, the objective's clear in Gaza. Unfortunately, Israel doesn't seem any closer or close enough to getting those objectives, freeing the hostages, totally neutralizing Hamas. Still fighting going on in northern Gaza. Now pressure from the outgoing Biden administration on humanitarian aid. I don't think there'll be that pressure from the Trump administration, but clearly President Trump-elect Trump has reportedly said he wants Israel to wrap this up even by January 20th. I mean, so this government facing now a lot of pressure to take some kind of steps in Gaza.
Well, of course, with the hostages making this resolution so much more complicated, because Israel's ability to make a unilateral statement without bringing back the hostages is quite limited from an ethical perspective. That would be politically also impossible. I think what concerns me most about the protracted nature of what's going on there is that we're starting to see for the first time a little bit of a, how should I put it, deteriorated motivation amongst the reserve soldiers.
Right, and that has been reported, apparently.
Already, used to be 100% people, even more than 100% coming there, and now we're talking about 80%. I was talking to a graduate student of mine today. He's been 200 days as a reserve soldier, and he's a commander. He has a lot of soldiers on him. He said many of them are not coming for a variety of reasons. Some of them it's to save their marriage, some of them economically, and some of them feel after the firing of Yoav Gallant that the politicization of the decisions about the war are too much for them after 200 days. So I'm concerned that we need to at least give the soldiers a clear sense of where this is going, and maybe the government needs to do a better job of that, because that really is the most important thing, is that during a time of warfare that our soldiers stay with their mission, highly motivated, so that we can wrap this up.
I would also say passing a law that would enable ultra-Orthodox young men not to do their military duty is probably also not a way to boost morale among reservists.
I'm glad you said it. I was afraid it would be political, too political, but absolutely, that is something which undermines the motivation of people who've been given so much and are seeing that other people let off the hook.
Right, briefly.
Look, when I was embedded with IDF forces in Rafah already 2 months ago, even before Yahya Sinwar was killed in battle, the forces told me, the commanding officer said that the military objectives have already been achieved and they have nothing more to do there. But in the absence of a directive from the political echelon, they'll remain and they will continue to further dismantle, further degrade Hamas capabilities. But in the large scheme, already for months, Israeli forces have said themselves that they're ready to leave.
Right, and of course the day after plan, that is still what the Netanyahu government has to present, and certainly, again, it'll be interesting to see, and we'll discuss the incoming U.S. administration, if there's also going to be put more pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to present that. And speaking of Prime Minister Netanyahu, he did release a video message this evening in English directly addressing the people of Iran, something he has done in the past. Now, in this video, he criticized the regime's obsession with destroying Israel, its spending of billions of dollars on its military and its proxy forces in order to achieve that goal, instead of improving the lives of Iranian citizens. And the Prime Minister also had this message.
Another attack on Israel would simply cripple Iran's economy. It would rob you of many more billions of dollars. I know that you don't want this war. I don't want this war either. The people of Israel don't want this war. There is one force putting your family in grave danger: the tyrants of Tehran. That's it. But there's also good news. Every day, that regime gets weaker. Every day, Israel gets stronger. The world has seen but a fraction of our power.
Ariel, again, an appeal to the people of Iran, but I think also they're a warning to the regime of Iran, who is still threatening to take another counteraction in response, of course, to the latest Israeli reaction to Iran's attacks.
Right, so another direct message by Prime Minister Netanyahu, trying to appease the Iranian people, saying that Israel is not at war with the people of Iran, but against the regime, the Islamic State. And part of that message to the regime that you alluded to is the IDF unveiling today its 6th submarine, calling it Drakon. And this joins Israel's arsenal of strategic naval capabilities. That's what we're seeing right now from the inauguration ceremony, the naming ceremony today. And we have to remember the importance of Israel's submarines are what's called the second strike capability. That is what is Israel's true deterrence in nuclear warfare, what's called mutual assured destruction. When to prevent your adversary from launching a nuclear strike against you, you have to maintain a capability to strike them even before their strike arrives in Israel. That's why you have
right.
submarines.
Or we should say second strike, even if a nuclear bomb, I hate to say it, lands in Israel and wipes out Israel, there are Israeli submarines that will react.
And before they hit Israel, that's the point.
Yeah.
That is the strategic importance of such naval capabilities. So Israel inaugurating the 6th submarine, saying that they are in progress of inaugurating additional submarines in the upcoming decade. If we go back to Prime Minister Netanyahu, we know that that was another whole issue of the submarine deal with Germany. But this is part of the dividends of that deal, the submarine deal with Germany, capabilities like this. Israel inaugurating in time of war a clear message to Iran, its 6th submarine.
And of course, Salon, there are analysts in Israel and also members of the political class which say, let's resolve some of these conflicts to at least the fighting, the combat in Gaza and in the north with Hezbollah, because really dealing with Iran one way or another, be it militarily, diplomatically, through sanctions, the incoming U.S. administration has to be the main strategic focus of Israel.
I think absolutely. I think that one of the interesting things, and I don't think it's so much a left-right divide as you might expect, is that Israel has this rare window of opportunity where engaging with Iran and taking out some of their nuclear threat has international approval. And we are, at this point, in this sort of silly ping-pong game, but we have actually not really answered the hundreds of missiles that were sent at us. That's a very difficult thing to do when your Air Force is engaged all the time in Lebanon in a full-force way. So I think that, yes, there is, we have not yet seen the last word with this conflict with Iran. And certainly the fact that Joe Biden sent aircraft carriers to the region with offensive air capacities also suggests that now that the price of oil is not going to be a politically volatile issue in the same ways that it was before the elections in the U.S., there might be some serious cooperation in this area.
Right, and maybe a freer hand for Israel in his choice of targets if Iran does not heed Prime Minister Netanyahu's warning this evening.
But there's a lot of voices, even in parties to the left of the Likud, which saying that Israel should continue, that we showed great self-restraint in deference to the desire of the Democratic administration before the election, but maybe now we need to take off the gloves and hit again.
All right, well, we'll see, and that certainly may well be the case, of course, when a new Trump administration comes in. In fact, we're going to be looking at some of the people coming into the Trump administration who may well back Israel having a strong response in Iran. We'll have more on that in a moment. In the meantime, Professor Alon Tal, Ariel Osran, stay with us. Lots more coming up on this edition of The Rundown. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips.
whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. Let's move now to the U.S., where the Biden administration has truly entered its lame duck phase now that it's set to hand over the White House to a Republican successor on January 20th. But until then, Joe Biden does still wield the full power of the presidency. And some past chief executives have made significant foreign policy moves during this transition period, not always to Israel's liking. President Biden today welcomed Israeli President Isaac Herzog to the White House, and our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim is there. And Mike, let's hear about probably, of course, the last visit between at least Isaac Herzog and President Biden when they both hold that title of president.
That's correct. And this meeting wasn't even planned for a very long time. It just came together on Saturday. Herzog was in the States to meet with American Jewry, some get-togethers on Capitol Hill, and just decided, hey, let's slip into the Oval Office and give a farewell to President Biden. Of course, with everything happening right now, it's not that simple. There were some discussions of substance regarding Gaza, regarding Lebanon, regarding the hostages. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan did enter the meeting later, as did his deputy John Feiner and Brett McGurk of the National Security Council, the White House's point man on the Middle East. By the way, Amos Hochstein, the special envoy that's been dealing with the Lebanon portfolio, told reporters earlier here at the White House that there is a shot to get something done on Lebanon in the coming days, and that he's hopeful. President Herzog also told reporters after his Oval Office meeting today that he hopes to see things, quote unquote, in the coming days move on a number of fronts, including the aforementioned Gaza, Lebanon, and hostage arenas. Let's take you inside the Oval Office earlier this morning with Joe Biden and President Isaac Herzog.
Well, Mr. President, welcome back to the Oval Office in the White House. You've been a friend for a long time, a personal friend, and you know my commitment to Israel is ironclad, and we share a deep friendship. I want to thank you again for being here.
Most importantly, I'm here on behalf of the people of Israel and the nation of Israel and the state of Israel to say to you, Mr. President, thank you very much. As we say in Hebrew, Toda Rabba. You've been an incredible friend of Israel and the Jewish people for decades. And we will never forget, ever in history, how you stood up with us in our darkest hour, which became our finest hour, how you came to Israel a few days after the barbaric attack of October 7th, how you helped us and supported us with words and deeds. And I want to express our heartfelt thanks to you, Mr. President, which is a great legacy that you stood up with the Jewish people and the state of Israel, as you always did.
Now, Kalev, President Herzog did take up most of the oxygen in the room. Biden said very little, other than a few well-worn lines that we've heard before. Herzog, though, did press Biden to continue to pressure Iran during his time left, and said it just needs to be not something that's done over the next 2 months, but needs to carry over into the next administration as well.
Right, and speaking of the Biden administration, I just want to mention, because following up on an earlier story we covered, reports, Barak Ravid of Axios reporting claiming that the Biden administration will not stop its weapon supplies to Israel over the humanitarian aid situation. Perhaps Israel has made enough gestures for it to satisfy, at least for now, the Biden administration. But Mike, stay with us, because I do want to stay focused on Washington, because you know, there had been some concern among Israel supporters that President-elect Trump's second administration may veer too much in the direction of the isolationist American first views held by some of his close political associates. But those concerns have been assuaged somewhat by Trump reportedly choosing 3 strong pro-Israel lawmakers from Congress for top foreign policy jobs. Emma Siegel gives us a closer look at those picks.
President-elect Donald Trump is ramping up his support for Israel with his latest picks to join his administration in January. On Sunday, Trump announced he picked U.S. Representative Elise Stefanik as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, who regularly criticizes the institution for its attitude towards Israel. Stefanik made headlines last year with her questioning of college presidents who did not denounce anti-Semitism during a House hearing. In May, she went to southern Israel to see the communities destroyed on October 7th before addressing Israel's Knesset.
I have been clear at home, and I will be clear here. There is no excuse for an American president to block aid to Israel, aid that was duly passed by the Congress. There is no excuse to ease sanctions on Iran, paying a $6 billion ransom to the world's leading state sponsor of terror, or to dither and hide while our friends fight for their lives.
Sources now say that Trump has selected Mike Waltz as a national security advisor. Waltz is a strong adversary of Iran, and after Israel retaliated against Iran last month, Waltz said that Israel should have struck Iranian oil exports and nuclear facilities. He is also very outspoken on Israel-U.S. ties.
At the end of the day, there is strong support for Israel. We understand Israel is in the middle of a war, that this could mean the end of its existence if the ring of fire that the Ayatollah continually talks about between Hezbollah, Hamas, the militias in Syria, the Houthis to the south, and then direct attacks from Iran. God help us all if Iran achieves a nuclear weapon. That is terrifying to everyone. So there is steady and strong support.
Trump is expected to tap strong Israel supporter Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Rubio also holds strong stances against Iran, and in October he released a statement saying he supported Israel's right to, quote, disproportionately stop threats from Iran. He spoke about the Iranian regime in an exclusive interview with I-24 News.
The central issue in this region is Iran's ambition to be a regional hegemonic power. If Iran did not exist, let me not say Iran, if the Iranian regime were not in power and did not exist, there would be no Hezbollah. There probably would be no Hamas, certainly not with these capabilities. There most certainly would be no Houthi threat. Syria would look very different. Iraq would look very different. Imagine a region without the Iranian regime.
As Trump takes office in just a few months, Iran deterrence and stabilizing the Middle East appear to be top priorities on his agenda.
And going back to Mike Wagenheim, Mike, just in the past hour, the Trump team confirming the pick of Mike Waltz as the national security advisor. And I don't want to exaggerate and say that Israel, the government here, and its supporters are breathing a sigh of relief over these picks, but certainly I think some of the concerns they had about the next administration have been eased by picking certainly these three, and especially Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, people who have, for example, spoken with I-24 News just in recent months about their strong support of Israel and their concerns over Iran.
Not just breathing a sigh of relief, Kyle. They're dancing the horror right now at the Prime Minister's office with these selections by Donald Trump. I mean, we were expecting some isolationists possibly in those positions, or maybe some who lean at least a little bit toward Trump's new foreign policy and the MAGA foreign policy. Hasn't been that case at all. I mean, Rubio and Mike Waltz are in the mold of old-school Republicans on policy, both pro-Israel stalwarts to the hilt. They'll challenge anybody who views the situation otherwise. I mean, you couldn't have selected two better picks, I think, if you're sitting in the Prime Minister's office right now. And Elise Stefanik will be a firebrand at the United Nations. She already told Isaac Herzog in a meeting this morning that she'll have Israel's back there. And we didn't expect otherwise, but always good to hear that if you're within the Israeli government in a very problematic institution like the UN. By the way, Marco Rubio told us last Tuesday at Donald Trump's watch party on election night that he would, with the Republicans taking over the Senate, not knowing then that he would be nominated likely for Secretary of State, he said that the Republican Senate should take up defunding more UN agencies that he feels are either in cahoots with Hamas or turn a blind eye to those terror organizations that operate in Gaza and elsewhere.
Yes, I would suspect UNRWA won't be seeing a penny of American aid over the next 4 years, at the very least, and not just in the UN as well. Mike Wagenheim there in Washington, D.C. Thank you for that. And still with us, Professor Alon Tal and Ariel Osran. And listen, the policy that's going to be set in the White House will be by the president, by Donald Trump, who is unpredictable. There is talk, of course, on the Palestinian issue. He may have differences with the Netanyahu government. He already had some with this. On the Iran issue, we know he has said, President-elect Trump has said he wants to end wars, not start wars. But again, overall, as Mike said, I don't know if dancing the horror may be a bit much, but certainly I would say a sigh of relief over these picks alone.
Well, I think that there's not only the consistency of the support for Israel, but also the fact that these are interventionist type of people. I think the person who's dancing the horror is actually President Zelensky in Ukraine, because there's certainly a branch of the Republican Party that was less inclined to continue support for them. And from my familiarity with Senator Rubio's position and the other appointees, they're all fairly strong supporters of continued support. So I would think this matters a lot. The question I think that we don't know is to what extent the deal of the century is going to be revived. Because if you remember, although there was a lot to be celebrating in Israel, the right wing in Israel was very uncomfortable with the fact that it did have a two-state solution core to it.
Right, and it delayed the prospect of what some call annexation of the West Bank, or extending Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria.
It expected the Jordanians to give up land to help the Palestinian borders grow a little bit, but I'm not sure that all of the people who are dancing the horror in Jerusalem are going to be enthusiastic about all the aspects of that. But this is something we'll have to wait to see how it unfolds until January, when the new administration takes over.
Right. But certainly, I think, Ariel, on the Iran issue, this is a relief, because especially we heard Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz in particular there have been strongly, certainly in a policy, what was called the maximus pressure on Iran. That seems more and more likely to be an approach taken by the second Trump administration.
That is a possibility. We also heard President-elect Trump voice openness for a renewed nuclear deal with Iran, and that's also something that Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, said that he's interested in seeing moving forward. So it will be interesting to see, as Trump said that first he wants to see, or Trump's advisors have said that first he wants to see a resolution of the conflicts in Gaza and in Lebanon before tackling Iran. It wouldn't be too outlandish to expect that perhaps maybe the diplomatic route would be off the get-go with Iran, as opposed to the policy of maximum pressure and further military intervention. But obviously, with Trump, we saw the volatility of the first administration, of the first term. That could definitely be the case now. It will also be interesting to see who are the rest of his Middle East team, because we saw if in the first term it was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Today, a more prominent figure is his other son-in-law's father, Masad Boulos, rather than a young Jewish American. We have a Christian Lebanese who, albeit was born in the United States, living in Texas. But this shows that there is more openness towards the Arab-Muslim sentiment in America, and that will be very interesting to see how that is translated to policy regarding the Middle East, with what we see as a pro-Israel cabinet, especially regarding foreign policy.
Right. But President-elect Trump has thanked the Arab American community, and he's going to have to, in some way, perhaps answer their concerns. Now, one issue certainly that's going to see a dramatic change from the Biden administration to the second Trump administration is environmental policy. In fact, an early indication, another Congressman, Lee Zeldin, Jewish congressman of New York, quite on the right on the environmental issues now, was appointed the head of the incoming head of the Environmental Protection Agency. But globally, of course, the environmental, especially concerns over global warming, continue. Now, COP29 is the latest edition of the United Nations Climate Change Conference. It's being held this week in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku. Now, the main item on the agenda is, of course, as usual, reducing carbon emissions, but other concerns, more political, were expressed by the leaders present there, including, of course, the nearby war in Ukraine, or not far from there, and Israel's war against Hamas, and the Israel-Palestinian conflict was brought up predictably by the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Here's what he had to say.
As we discuss leaving behind a more just world for future generations, Israel's attacks, which disregard law, morality and conscience, that target Palestine and Lebanon, are continuing. The current government unfortunately continues to massacre people without distinguishing between children, women and the elderly, and to cause a huge environmental slaughter.
Professor Alon Tal, among you in your long resume is, of course, you were one of, some people even call you the father of Israel's environmental movement. I do want to get your take on COP29 because challenges posed, of course, by the incoming Trump administration and the politicization of forums such as this by President Erdogan.
Well, this is the great tragedy. You know, we've had some very bad news climatically. Not surprisingly, 2024 was the hottest year on record. We can already say that with some confidence. And just last week, we heard some bad news that the 1.5 average degree temperature rise that the Paris Agreement was trying to prevent has pretty much happened. In Israel, which is a climate hotspot for quite some times now, we've seen a 1.5 degree temperature increase. So you would think that they would have a sense of crisis, and this kind of nonsense, like President Erdogan brings up, would not color debates. But again, the criticism behind the fact that for the second straight year, an oil-producing company hosts the conference, and again, they have the gavel-holding authority to set the agenda, really lowers expectations. Israel sent 100 Israelis to there, but it was largely from its climate tech industry. Nobody expects Israel to come through in a year of warfare, but in general, because of our long-term, how should I put, disregard for the global expectations for Israel to come through. The climate law that's now in the Knesset is very weak. So for environmentalists, this is not a good week. Certainly the appointment of Representative Zeldin is not good news. He's only got 15% approval rating from the League of Conservation Voters. So we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And hopefully there'll be something to come out of Azerbaijan, but the expectations are extremely low at this point.
Right. This is a challenging time. Oh, some breaking news, Ariel, quite significant.
Yeah, the Trump statement from the President-elect Trump that he has announced that he is nominating the former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, to be nominated to the U.S. ambassador to Israel. In the statement from the transition team of the Trump-Vance team, they're saying that Mike has been a great public servant, governor, and leader in faith for many years. He loves Israel and the people of Israel, and likewise, the people of Israel love him. Mike will work tirelessly to bring about peace in the Middle East.
Well, gentlemen, first of all, I want to say something of a surprise here. I hadn't heard Mike Huckabee's name. A lot of people were speculating that David Friedman who had expressed his desire to come back again and serve as President Trump's ambassador to Israel, might be given a second chance at that, and it would not be unprecedented. We do have past ambassadors to Israel who have served 2 non-consecutive terms, for example. But Mike Huckabee, being chosen, someone very close to the evangelical movement, somebody who is in tune. I think the Israeli right would be happy with that choice alone. But interesting, I think mainly evangelical supporters of Israel are going to be happy about that. But we'll see what role that plays and if that's an indication of where a deal of the century may or may not be going.
It is interesting because we do have a sort of a history or a litany of Jewish American ambassadors from the United States to Israel who have, and here we
both have, and I should say both from the right and the left, and with the center or the left, and Tom Nides and Jack Lew and David Friedman. This is the first, certainly the first evangelical.
Martin Indyk. You can go down the list in history. So I think that we, first of all, we want to welcome him. He's certainly a long-time supporter of Israel. I don't think on this issue, I think there's a lot of bipartisan Israeli acknowledgement that we are grateful to the evangelical community for their long-term support of us politically. It'll be interesting. I don't think David Friedman, we've heard the last word from him, and I think that he may be part of the Middle Eastern team that Trump is going to put together. He certainly would like to be influential, and he has grandchildren in Israel, so he's all in that respect.
Right, and of course there may be other officials that are dealing more at the on the level of trying to perhaps set peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors and that necessarily not be the ambassador to Israel. But it is interesting. Mike Huckabee, who, of course, has run for president. He was governor of Arkansas. His daughter, who served as President Trump's press secretary, now serves as the governor of that state. He's been on Fox News for quite a bit as a popular commentator. Israel is going to have to now welcome back Mike Huckabee. That will be the new U.S. ambassador to Israel for President-elect Donald Trump. I want to thank Professor Alon Tal for joining this evening, and our Ariel Osaran, our Middle East correspondent, as well. Now, for the past 3 years, three brothers in southern Israel have been running a refreshment station for soldiers going in and out of the Gaza Strip. Now, what started out as a grassroots way to help out on October 7th has now become a home away from home for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who have had to make a pit stop there on their way to Gaza, in and out, over the past year. Nicole Tzedek went down to the Shuva Brothers refreshment stand to take a look at what it's all about.
All right. All right. Again? Dan just came back from a second tour volunteering in Israel.
Now we're on camera now, huh? Yes, shalom. Volunteering all over the place. This is one of the stops, must-do stop for volunteers.
And then...
That's what all of the volunteers say at Shuva Brothers, a 24/7 refreshment stand near the Gaza Strip.
And then a guy who comes here every Monday and Wednesday. Lilian. She's like, I don't know,
80 years old.
She's coming with all their like huge piles of homey-made food, like.
And imagine for the soldiers, their grandma just served them food in the middle of the war, you know?
זה שנה וחודשיים אחרי, אנחנו מ-7 לאוקטובר פה, כל יום. התחלנו בקפה, אנחנו נבוא גם בערב, ותמיד יהיה פה מלא, ותמיד פה מתנדבים, ותמיד בעשייה, ותמיד עם חיוך ובאהבה. ויש פה את החנות הזאת, אפילו הגרביים שלי, מכאן. כל דבר, 24/7, כל מה שנצטרך.
13 months ago, this was nothing but the welcome sign to the tiny town of Shuva right near the Gaza border. Well, today, you can clearly see what they've done with the place. And more than 1,000 soldiers come right here every day to get 24/7 help.
This wall basically is the only concrete in the place. That's the only thing that was here. That's the entrance sign to Moshav Shuva. I'm saying that, for example, it's like someone will turn the Hollywood sign into a refreshment stop for hikers.
Something that all started as a way to help on October 7th, 2023.
After we heard the bombing, we realized this war going on. I started to thinking, okay, what can I do? I have no weapon, I'm not a soldier, but anything, who needs help? And that's how it all began.
Right outside of Kobe Trebelsi's town of Shuva, the army started treating wounded soldiers.
It was an actual field hospital in the junction. Okay, the army understand they cannot send more helicopters inside to the war zone because of an RPG threat. So they made this junction a field hospital. That's where they brought all the bodies. That's where they brought all the wounded.
So Kobe and his brothers, Dror and Eliran, set up a refreshment stand to help out.
We have the photos of this place as 2 tables. One table with some hot food and hot water, coffee, tea, you know. The second table with some underwear, some deodorants, like basic stuff.
But 2 picnic tables quickly expanded into a full operation.
So we kept thinking, how can we make the place better and nicer and give them the warm feeling and the great food and the hot food and the mamas to serve the food. It's not about the numbers of the soldier, it's about the numbers of the hearts that we feel with love.
Which is a lot of full bellies and happy hearts.
Until today, that we know that we already fed more than 500,000 soldiers.
With volunteers coming from all over the world.
Right now at the second, okay, Naomi is from, I think, California. This girl is from England. Ruth is from Germany. 5 different countries, people coming to volunteer. And we're really calling people to come and volunteer in Israel.
Not only to help out, but to spread the Shuva Brothers message.
In a way, this place became more than a refreshment point, became a place that shouted out an idea. Many people around the world and around the country are waking up and say, watching the news and looking for a way to be helpful in this situation. And this is the place for them.
A place that's become strong in its makeshift foundation over the past year.
We're still getting soldiers coming out here and being like, wow, it's incredible that you guys are still here for us. The guys that actually fighting for the last year and something are so surprised that the people are still here for them.
שכולם כבר התפזרו, באמת, כי כבר אין כוחות, והיו פה הרבה תחנות רענון, הם היחידים שנשארים פה. זה לא מובן מאליו, זה מדהים, זה נותן לנו כוחות.
And that positive feeling is what it's all about.
People are tired of hearing about bad stuff. People lost family, having their kids injured in the battles. They want to hear some good. They want to see some good. They want to do good.
Which is exactly what the Shuva brothers are doing every day. Reporting from Moshav Shuva, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
Worth going down there to buy a drink off those fellas. We do have some news. The IDF releasing the names of the two individuals who were killed by that rocket today in Nahariya. Ziv Belfer, 52 years old, and Shimon Najam, 54 years old. May their memories be a blessing. That ends our program for today. Thank you for joining us on The Rundown on I-24 News.